Welcome to episode 1 of the Intellectual Barbarian podcast. In this episode, I explain a little of who I am, why I'm starting this podcast, and how I hope to, as Dr. Jordan Peterson says, help direct the world on its careening trajectory a bit more towards heaven and a bit more away from hell. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the Intellectual Barbarian podcast. Now you might wonder, why the name Intellectual Barbarian? Well, my wife says I'm a barbarian practically every day. I break things that aren't supposed to be broken. When people take this, open a straw and they pull the little wrapper off the straw, it seems like a simple thing, but for some reason when I try to do that, the straw breaks in half, and I don't even know how that happens. Or I'll pick up a glass and the glass will break. I'm just like a bull in a china shop sometimes. But while I am a barbarian, I'm interested in philosophy, I like art, I like musicals. One of my favorite things is barbershop music. I read voraciously. I'm a total science geek and nerd. So I'm simultaneously equally at home with a book on philosophy in my hand, or swinging an axe or using a chainsaw. I've served in the military, which is, not something that you would think an intellectual might do, twice. But I love literature, I write poetry, I'm this weird dichotomy of barbarian and intellectual, and so that's where we get the name of the podcast. So just to tell you a little bit about who I am, got married right out of high school to my high school sweetheart. We've been married for 38 years, we have 3 kids. I've served in the military and active duty twice, a decade apart. Once, kind of right after high school, I was a combat medic, served for about 4.5 years of active duty, and got out right after Desert Shield, Desert Storm, where I served as a medic. And had really no intention of going back into the military at that point. Got betrayed in the military by my commander and had a really foul, bad taste in my mouth. Anyway, really had no intention of going back in the military. But I was actually in college at the time at Sam Houston State University when 9/11 happened. I was in the day room of the ROTC building watching the second tower get hit in real time. And when I went home that night, I told my wife that my country's under attack. I think my country needs me. And would you support me if I went back into the military? And of course, my family, I don't think they had any idea what it was going to entail, but they said they would support me. So 2 days later, I was in a recruiter's office trying to figure out how to get back into the military. By that point, I had gone to college and went to officer candidate school. About 10 years of active duty after 9/11, just going from one deployment to another, to another, to another. It was during that time when I was working for the Texas Army National Guard that I got involved in the Texas Tea Party movement and was president of my local Tea Party. Went to Washington, D.C. a couple of times. Went to all the big marches. I actually helped organize a very large march in Bryan College Station with 4 other Tea Parties, 5 including us. Let me tell you a little bit about what I think, what makes me different from most people, because I am kind of an intellectual barbarian. I think I'm kind of a mutant. I have a lot of weird interests, but I also have a kind of different perspective than most people do. I am super skeptical. I think it's my superpower. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche said that most people are naive until they've been betrayed, and that the greater the betrayal, the less naive they'll be, or the more skeptical they'll become. And as a young child, 2-3 years old, my mom was married to a guy who was an alcoholic, and he was really abusive, not only to her, to my mom, but also to us kids. I mean, I'm like 2 or 3 years old, and he would grab me by the arm and throw me up against the wall. I was terrified of him. Anyway, I really learned at a very, very young age to not be naive, to realize that people can do a lot of bad things. Not that all people were bad, but that people have within them the ability to do bad things. In fact, Alexander Solzhenitsyn said the line between good and evil runs down the middle of every human heart, which means that we all have within us the ability to do evil or to do good. And that's a good thing to know, that if we were living in Germany at the time of Hitler, that most of us would have been guards for the concentration camps without a problem, because that's the way most people are. It only a very, very tiny percentage of people would be the heroic crusader against what's wrong. And statistically, that's probably not you, and it's probably not me. So I think it's important to understand that people can act out of malice. Not that they all are, but that people can act out of malice. Heinlein's razor says that never attribute to malice that which can be more easily attributed to stupidity, but don't rule out malice. In other words, just because it can be explained by some other means, that doesn't mean that it isn't malice. So we should consider it. Not that it's always the cause, that's always the motivator of people, is malice, but just to know in the back of your mind that, hey, some people do act out of malice, that it does exist. So anyway, I have this inborn skepticism. My first instinct whenever I see or read anything is, well, that's not true. And then I go check. For example, in 2006, when Al Gore came out with his movie and book of the same title, An Inconvenient Truth, when I first heard about the theory of man-made global warming, it seemed completely logical. If CO2 is a greenhouse gas, which it seemed to be, then the more of it that's in the atmosphere, then the warmer it would become. It just seemed like cause and effect. It seemed very straightforward. Science didn't seem like it was mysterious. I didn't see anything nefarious about it at all, at least not initially. But being skeptical, sort of hardwired skeptical, I decided, well, let me go check. Let me go see if the science really backs up what Al Gore and these people are saying about global warming, man-made global warming from carbon dioxide. And as I started doing research, I started seeing that there were problems with the science and the scientists themselves, that the scientists showed that they were motivated by things other than science, a political agenda. And that was revealed in the ClimateGate emails and other areas. So there were, not only were the scientists motivated, like they weren't showing people their formulas, they weren't showing people the data, they were trying to ruin the careers of people who disagreed with them or had science that was other than supported man-made global warming. They blackballed people. They would did all these dirty, underhanded tricks to get people to not be able to publish their papers or to get fired from positions in universities. That is agenda driven, and if you have an agenda, then you can't be a scientist by definition. A scientist should just go where the science leads. Let the chips fall where they made. As soon as you have an agenda, then you are no longer a scientist. You are a propagandist. You're an advocate for a cause, and you can wear the suit, you can write the papers, you can be published, you can pretend to be a scientist, but as soon as you have an agenda, you're no longer a scientist. Anyway, what I learned is that not only were there huge holes in the science, especially like Michael Mann's hockey stick and some of the things that James Hansen was saying, he's the kind of the high priest of the global warming agenda, that I learned that in the past that it's been warmer than it is now for most of the Earth's history, that the Earth goes into these ice ages every 100,000 years or so, 90 to 100,000 years. They last about 70, 80,000 years. And then we pop out into some warming for about 10 to 20,000 years. And then it goes right back into an ice age. And that cycle has lasted about 2.5 million years from what I've seen from the data. And that the data also showed that for most of the last 12,000 years, it's been warmer than it is now. That the warming started before humans really started contributing to greenhouse gases by using fossil fuels. So the warming had already begun before humans started using fossil fuels, showing that the warming is not fossil fuel driven. Also in the Vostok ice cores and in other ways of measuring the Earth's atmosphere content, it showed that that the warming happens before the CO2 goes up. And they don't show that. Al Gore never showed you that the temperature goes up before the CO2 goes up. So anyway, I started telling people, everybody I knew, that, hey, man, there's real problems with this global warming stuff. You might ask, what authority do I have to debunk all these scientists, the stuff there's a scientific consensus on? Well, first of all, science isn't proved by consensus. Science isn't a popularity contest. It's never really proved. Nothing can ever be proved. It can only be debunked or disproved, or the actual term is falsified by data, by research. And those who are politically motivated make sure that it can't be falsified, because they just don't give you the data. They don't give you the formulas. They don't give you the way to falsify your data, that's not science. If you're going to write a paper and you're going to do it in such a way that it can't be falsified, that's not science by definition. A skeptic might ask, and again, I can understand the viewpoint of the skeptic. What does Ryan Scott Welch know about global warming? What authority does he have? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. I guarantee that I've read more science papers, I've read more books, I've read more articles than either Al Gore or Greta Thunberg or Bill Nye the Science Guy. I've read more papers than all of those guys combined. And those guys are considered as prominent advocates for the man-made global warming hysteria. And none of them really are scientists. And you might think, well, Scott, you're not a scientist either. Well, I've actually written one paper in a peer-reviewed paper when I was going to college. I actually conducted one study, was a lead author on a paper. So I'm actually published. I don't really consider myself a scientist, but I'm certainly at least as qualified as Al Gore, Bill Nye the Science Guy, and Greta Thunberg. So, for whatever that's worth. Again, my first instinct when I hear something is probably not true. Then I go check it, but I really research it. If I come out and talk about a subject, especially if it's controversial, and those are really the only ones that interest me. If I come out and talk about a controversial subject, you can be sure that I've researched it first, especially if I'm going to take a position that's contrary to the prevailing winds or whatever's popular right now. So why am I doing a podcast? Dr. Jordan Peterson said this, that the legacy media is done. They're so done. They're so dead to people under 30 that it isn't even noticed. And what that means is that the old media, their monopoly that they had on the message is over because of the internet, because of YouTube, because of smartphones. Those three combined have really done in the old legacy media. Newspapers are mostly dead and are fast dying. Even talk radio is going the way of podcasts. The legacy news stations and the cable news, they're dying so quick. They're laying off people right and left because people don't trust them anymore. They're agenda driven, and they're really not keeping up with the technology and the changing culture. The culture is changing. People are changing. People are consuming information in different ways, and the legacy media is done. First of all, they're politically motivated, or they're ignorant, or both. And secondly, they're dying. Yeah, I believe this. We need some honesty and some skepticism to fill the void of the old media, and perhaps even to help replace them. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this. He said that silence in the face of evil is evil itself, and God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. And so if I know something that is going against, or if I learn something that is going against the propaganda that is being spoon-fed to us by the old legacy media, I'm morally obligated to speak up against it. Dr. Jordan Peterson said this. He said that you can help to direct the world on its careening trajectory a bit more towards heaven and a bit more away from hell. Dr. Jordan Peterson also said this. He said, when you have something to say, silence is a lie. About the same time that I was learning, around 2006, 2008 time frame, about that same time, when I was learning that this whole man-made global warming thing is an incredible hoax. It's a lie. It's a scam. it is almost everything that they say is untrue, especially all their predictions of doom from CO2. Almost every one of those is a complete fabrication, and they know it. Studies show that most of America knows that the media is biased. And I decided to try to combat that by going to school myself and to become a journalist. So I went to Sam Houston State University to get a degree in mass communication, multi platform mass communication, really with a concentration on journalism. And initially, I thought I could kind of combat that by becoming a journalist myself. My idea was go to college, get a degree in journalism, get a job in a network or radio station or TV somewhere as a reporter, and fight the fight for, for truth by being a voice of truth within the media itself. But then I realized that the media is dead. They're basically committing suicide by agenda. So they're so agenda driven, they're so biased that they're killing themselves. And then on top of that, the technology is changing media. It's changing the way people consume media. Now everybody has a smartphone and they can watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts on demand, and they can listen to who they want to listen to, when they want to listen to them, for as long as they want to, and they can stop it and start it again tomorrow or the next day or a week later and pick it up right where they were left off. People are no longer a slave to the formats that the old legacy media had, whether it be talk radio, or whether it be the news. And so instead of getting a job in the media or trying to write for a paper that's dying, or for a news station that's dying because of, not only because of their bias, but because of the technology, I decided that I just start my own podcast. That, I believe, is the future, that the future way that people will consume media is through, their smartphones and through the internet, through podcasts. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to start my own podcast. One, not only to fight the bias of the legacy media, but also because I realized that the technology has left them behind. And if I want to contribute in any meaningful way, I need to have my own podcast. Another way I think that my podcast can help people is because I'm a real research geek. I like the research. I like to read articles. I like to wade through all the data and stuff. And most people, their eyes glaze over. They don't have the time. They don't have the drive. They just want somebody to wade through all the information for them and then hand it to them in a nice, neat, little, short, concise package where they can easily understand it in a short amount of time, because people are busy. They have lives, they have kids, they have families, they have a job, they have cares, they don't have the time really to devote to the research that they on every issue. I can't research every issue either, but I'm just driven to do the research for anything, usually the controversial things. And I'm totally willing to do the research. I'm wired for it. And so I can do that. I can read the books. I can read the peer-reviewed articles. I can skeptically look at it because I don't pick sides. I think both parties are biased. Both parties are agenda-driven. All the rest is just theater, just to keep us fighting against each other so that they can enrich and empower themselves. Friedrich Nietzsche said this. He said, "You can tell much about the character of a man by how much truth he can tolerate." I believe that most people really don't want to know the truth, that they just want to have their beliefs and ideas confirmed. They just want to hear things that confirm what they already believe. And I can understand that, because changing what you believe is hard. It means that you were wrong. You'd have to admit to yourself that you're wrong, and who likes that? It means that you'd have to sort of die in a way that that whole part of you that believes that has to die, and that's painful and scary. So, it's hard to admit that you're wrong. It's so much easier just to hear the things that confirm what you already believe. But I believe also that, from what I understand, is that most people don't really have ideas themselves. Most people are possessed by ideas. They didn't really think about it critically. They just hear something that sounds good, and then they adopt it as their own, as if they thought of it. but they haven't probably looked at it really analytically and probed it and tested it and looked for every way in which that idea is not true, so that they could really test it. And who has the time for that? It's so much easier just to believe the things that you want to believe. And so not only is it hard to do the research, but it's uncomfortable and painful, really, to change what you believe. So I understand that it's going to be hard for me to go against any kind of mainstream idea, because most people really don't want to hear the truth. But there are some who want to hear the truth, and eventually I believe the truth does win. And the sooner that the truth wins, the less pain there is all around. So I hope I can just save a lot of people a lot of pain by helping them to the truth earlier. The longer that we delude ourselves, the more we live in societies founded around lies, then the more damage that will come of it. So here are some of the things that I hope to feature in my podcast. One is if the left were honest. So I could take what the left says and then retranslate it to what they would say if they were really being honest. Another one is a feature from inside the smoke-filled room, and that's also politically driven. It's I'd like to do a parody or a reenactment of the conversations that are going on behind the closed doors from inside the smoke-filled room that led to the point to the propaganda that we're spoon-fed later. I'd like to do a daily or weekly sort of a global warming debunking, whatever the popular story is that week or that day. I'd like to just debunk it with science, with the data, with the skeptical information, with the perspective that I have from all the research that I've done. So I'd like to do a daily or weekly climate change debunking. I'd like to discuss postmodernism and neo-Marxism in ways that can be understood, because if you understood what motivates people or what they want, then everything they do makes perfect sense. For most people, conservatives or people on the right, they look at the things that the left does and they laugh at them and they mock them, and they are constantly puzzled by, why are they doing that? Why are they saying that? But to me it makes perfect sense, because I've done the research and I understand who they are, what they want, and how they hope to achieve it. And if you understand that, then everything they do makes perfect sense. When I look at the things that the left does, instead of getting confused or mocking or laughing at them, I'm like, yep, of course they're going to do that. Makes perfect sense to me. And so perhaps I can share that perspective with people who watch the podcast, that if I can explain who they are, what they want, what they believe, how they hope to achieve what they want to achieve, then that's liberating. The truth is liberating. The truth sets you free. Once you understand that, then you can counter it. But if you don't understand what people want and what they're doing and what they hope to achieve, then you're never going to be able to beat them. I mean, tactically speaking, the more you understand your enemy, then the better you are able to combat them. Not that they're enemy like they need to be destroyed, but certainly the ideas are the enemies to liberty. And the evidence is, the hundreds of millions of bodies that have been stacked up by these leftist ideas that as their experiments have come to fruition. And it doesn't matter what continent or what culture or what language the people are, every time it's tried, it ends in the same thing. It ends in death and the impoverishment of the people and the enslavement of the people to the state in the name of some utopian dream that will never come to pass. So that's another thing I want to do. I'd like to have a Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is my muse. He's kind of one of my heroes. I'd like to do a Dr. Jordan Peterson Insight. I'd also like to do a feature called Politics from a Biblical Perspective or a Scriptural perspective. I think that is something that's not really discussed a lot. That people look at politics as long as my side can win, it's my side versus their side, without really thinking about, is there a biblical standard, and if it is, what is it, and how that would change the way I perceive and act politically. Another thing I would like to do is I'd like to do some interviews I'd like to do some investigative reports, and then I'd like to do kind of a me on a soapbox feature. Every once in a while, I think we all do, but I certainly do. Every once in a while, I just want to get up on my soapbox and talk about some subject that interests me or that I'm passionate about. One of the reasons why I really decided to get involved with this global warming thing is because I understood that the motivation behind it was political, and that this was going to be the key weapon for the left, these neo-Marxist postmodernists, to achieve their political agenda. And their ultimate goal is a utopia. How they hope to achieve that goal is they know that America and Western society culture needs to be destroyed in order to achieve their utopian goal. Their agenda is really not motivated by all the things that they pretend to care about. In fact, everything that the left pretends to care about, I can show you with absolute evidence that they don't really care about it. That it's all just the ends justifies the means. It's a means to an end. It's an excuse to advance their agenda. The left thinks this one way. They say the goal is the utopia, and anything that advances that agenda is justified. So they have like a single algorithm. Does this advance the agenda, or does it not advance the agenda? If it advances the agenda, they do it. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong or whatever. They don't even believe in right or wrong. The left believes in moral relativism, that the ends justifies the means, that there is no absolute truth, there is no absolute right or wrong, that everything has to be weighed in relation to their utopian agenda. And if it advances the agenda, then it's good for them, and that's what they do. Another feature I'd like to try to do is that where I can show you with evidence, you pick a subject, and we'll pick everything that the left pretends to talk about one by one, whether it be children or women's rights or the environment or whatever it is, everything that the left pretends to care about, and I will show you what in excruciating detail with a preponderance of evidence that they really don't care about that it's just a tool to advance the agenda, that they're pretending to care to advance the agenda. So that's another thing that I'd like to do. So anyway, I think the global warming thing is really important because I believe it's the number one tool that the left will use to destroy our economy, which will be used to destroy America, which they believe is the chief obstacle to their goal to a Marxist utopia. So it's really important. I think it is the number one threat to those who love agency and liberty and freedom and all of that stuff, human rights. I think it's the number one tool that's going to be used to take those things from us in the name of achieving their Marxist utopia. And I don't think that most people understand that the threat of global warming is in the long run. See, the left used to think that the Marxist utopia was a great idea, and before we had evidence that it wasn't, they could just say, hey, let's try this whole communism thing. Let's try this socialism thing. Let's try this fascism thing. And fascism is socialism, communism. It's just a national socialism. That's what Nazi means, national socialists. So they're socialists, they're leftists, they're Marxists. They're all Marxists. The communists are Marxist. The Nazis are Marxist. They're just different flavors. One's a international socialism. One is a national socialism. That's the only difference. But the end result for the people is identical. So anyway, my hope is to give people hope that the truth will win, and that if we can join together, educate ourselves, educate those around us, teach each other, learn from each other, we can fight the lie, and that the truth will set you free, that there is hope for the future. I believe that we have hope for the future. Ultimately, my goal is to preserve liberty, and I want to do whatever I can. I think that, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, not to act is to act, not to speak is to speak, that silence in the face of evil is evil itself. I believe that every one of us can contribute either positively or negatively, either a little bit more towards heaven or a little bit more towards hell by what we do, or speaking out, or at least speaking for telling the truth. I believe that is the key. That is the key to our liberty and the key to our future, not only for ourselves but for future generations. Anyway, thank you for joining me on episode 1 of the Intellectual Barbarian podcast. I'd love to hear back from you, get some feedback from you guys, and let me know what you think, and we'll see you next week.